Make that, there we go. Okay, so thank you so much for having me. I always really enjoy partnering with GLYS, presenting with GLYS. My name is Dr. Jeff Fiorinoni. I coordinate the Women's and Gender Studies program at SUNY Fredonia, and my specialty is LGBTQ history. And so I thought, it being Pride Month, an appropriate topic would be talking about the history of the rainbow flag, which of course we're seeing right everywhere during the month of June. And you know, when I was younger, when I was in the age range that GLYS serves, I definitely did not know the history of the flag. I didn't know it until much later. So I really love, now that I do, being able to share that history with others, because I think, right, we see it everywhere as a symbol, but we don't necessarily know the full story behind it. And then I've titled this "Be Your Own Gilbert Baker," who was the creator of the rainbow flag, to also get us in the mindset of thinking about symbols and their power, and what symbols we might, associate or use for our own particular identities, and based on our own particular experiences. So we'll have an opportunity to think about that at the end. So just a little bit of context. Our story for today is set in San Francisco. And San Francisco has long historical associations with the LGBTQ community. So why is that the case? Well, San Francisco really becomes a city, or starts to become the city that it is today, because of the gold rush of 1849, right, when people are going to California in search of gold. And as San Francisco develops, there was a section of the city called the Barbary Coast, which was essentially the red light district. And what I mean by that is, this is where kind of the bars, the speakeasies, this is where sex workers congregated, anyone who was outside of gender and sexuality norms. This is where, there was jazz and blues clubs. So there's this section of San Francisco, right, that's associated with people that are different. And then with World War II, we see a great shift in American society in gender and sexuality norms. The war allows a lot of younger people who are involved in the war effort to figure out their identities, to come out. And then San Francisco is a major port city. So during and after World War II, we see a lot of LGBTQ people flocking to San Francisco. So we start to see that community developing. And the district of San Francisco that's most associated with the LGBTQ community is the Castro. However, it doesn't start out that way. It originally starts out as a conservative Irish working class district, but then increasingly becomes more associated with the LGBTQ community over time, until the 1970s, the Castro is considered to be, a quote unquote gay mecca, and people from across the country are flocking to San Francisco and the Castro district. Additionally, the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco is associated with a lot of kind of countercultural movements. So you may have heard of the Summer of Love, which took place in 1967, where essentially, right, there was all of these hippies and people that were into free love who converged upon San Francisco and the Haight-Ashbury district. So San Francisco has kind of long been associated with alternative expressions of gender and sexuality, shall we say. And of course, in terms of LGBTQ history, San Francisco is very much associated with Harvey Milk, who's the first openly gay man elected to public office in the US to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1977. And Harvey Milk plays an important role in the development of the rainbow flag. So he's part of that migration to the Castro district that we see happening in the 1970s. He comes from New York in 1972, is elected to the Board of Supervisors. And also one of the things I want to point out about Harvey Milk was not only was he gay, he was also Jewish, and that kind of shaped his view of the world, his commitment to social justice, and in particular, he was influenced by a particular Jewish teaching that he had learned from his mother, Minnie, that's called Tikkun Olam, which means, or it's a phrase that refers to the duty of Jewish people to work towards repairing the world. And so that perspective coming from Judaism, in addition to his gay identity, very much influenced his commitment to social change. Now, before the rainbow flag is created in 1978, there's a variety of different symbols that are used to represent the LGBTQ community. And I'll talk about a few of them. But one of the things that Harvey Milk thought was that we needed a more unifying symbol of liberation and hope. So one of the earlier symbols was the pink triangle. Well, where did that come from? Well, in Nazi Germany, male homosexuality in particular was criminalized under paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code. And during World War II, men who had been convicted under this penal code, they were called 175ers, when they were sent to concentration camps, labor camps, they were actually branded with the symbol of the pink triangle. And here's an example of that from one of the uniforms that they would wear from the camp. So some people in the 1960s and 70s start using the pink triangle as a gay symbol. However, that's not universally well received. Another popular symbol that we see during the 1970s is the Greek letter lambda, and this comes from a 1970s organization. It's founded in New York City in 1971, the Gay Activist Alliance, and they adopt the Greek letter lambda as their symbol. Right, we can see it on their t-shirts here and the guys in the photograph. And why did they choose lambda? Well, it's a symbol that represents power, knowledge, truth. However, again, this was not a universally adapted symbol, right? People didn't necessarily understand what it was, didn't connect with it. And then another symbol specific to the lesbian community at the time in the 1970s was the labrys. Well, what is the labrys? As we can see from the photograph, it's a double-headed battle axe that originates, so this style of battle axe originates from Minoa, Crete. So it's like an ancient battle axe, and apparently Minoa, Crete was a matriarchal society. So we can understand, right, based on that, why some members of the lesbian community adopted the labrys as a symbol of lesbian pride. But again, if we look at all of these symbols, they don't necessarily represent the entirety of the community. Some people connect to them, some people don't. So Harvey Milk thought we needed a more universal, all-inclusive, inspiring symbol. And so when Harvey Milk is on the organizing committee of San Francisco Gay Freedom Day in 1978, which is, essentially the precursor to modern day pride celebrations in San Francisco, he commissions a guy by the name of Gilbert Baker to create a new symbol for the community that will debut at San Francisco Gay Freedom Day that year. So who is Gilbert Baker? Why does Harvey Milk choose him? Well, he was born in Chinook, Kansas, and into a religious family, and from a young age was really interested in fashion and sewing, but knew, at the time in the 1950s and 60s when he's growing up, that's not something that's socially acceptable for little boys to be interested in. And then he's drafted into the Vietnam War in 1970, honorably discharged in 1972. And while he's serving in the US military, he's stationed in San Francisco, right? And so he discovers the gay community, decides to stay there. And it's really then when he's on his own that he is able to explore his talents for design and fashion and sewing, and realizes that San Francisco is not necessarily the best place if you want to get into the fashion industry, right? That would really be New York City. But in terms of the social change that's happening in San Francisco at the time, gay liberation, feminism, civil rights, a variety of different protest movements, he starts to use his sewing talents both to create drag costumes for performers in San Francisco, but also to create a variety of different, protest banners and social justice symbols. So he was like known as, right, the guy who could design and sew, which is why Harvey Milk asked him to create this new symbol. And at the time, he's paid $1,000 to do so. And so Gilbert Baker himself was also, a drag queen, a performer, did all of his own costumes. And later, right, so here's a photograph of him from 1987. He adopts the drag name Busty Ross, which is a play on Betsy Ross, who created the American flag, right? And people actually called him the gay Betsy Ross because of his role in designing the rainbow flag. Okay, so where did he get the idea of a flag, and then why a rainbow flag? And so in his memoir, which was posthumously published after his death in 2017, this is what he says, and he gets the idea, well, he's out dancing with his friends in San Francisco. So dance fused us, magical and cleansing. We were all in a swirl of color and light. It was like a rainbow, a rainbow. That's the moment when I knew exactly what kind of flag I would make. A rainbow flag was a conscious choice, natural and necessary. The rainbow came from earliest recorded history as a symbol of hope. In the book of Genesis, it appeared as proof of a covenant between God and all living creatures, right? So we can see he's drawing on his religious upbringing from Kansas. It was also found in Chinese, Egyptian, and Native American history. A rainbow flag would be our modern alternative to the pink triangle. Now the rioters who claimed their freedom at the Stonewall Bar in 1969 would have their own symbol of liberation. He also says that Why a flag? Well, flags represent nations. They represent a group of people who has a common history, who's connected together in some way, right? So that's why he chooses the flag, and then that's why he chooses the rainbow, right? So very conscientiously as a symbol of unification and also liberation. And of course, he's referencing influence to Stonewall here. So the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village in New York City, where in the early morning hours of June 28th of 1969, a riot broke out against the police. And this particular riot, there was also several nights of rioting after, receives a lot of attention, and it really serves as a catalyst and transforms the ongoing, right, LGBTQ movement at that point, right, and becomes a symbol of liberation in and of itself. And that riot, right, results in the first demonstration that's the precursor to our modern day Pride, which was held in New York City in 1970, Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day. So Baker is drawing on that inspiration and that history in terms of his development of the flag. And he assigned not a specific identity, but a quality or aspect of LGBTQ experience to each of the colors that he chose for his flag. And it's important to note here that in terms of his original design, there were 8 colors, not the more conventional 6 that we typically see. So he had hot pink for sex, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, turquoise for magic and art, indigo for serenity, and then violet for spirit. And in terms of the creation of this flag, and I didn't realize when I was originally starting to research this, the original flags that he made were like incredibly huge. We can see in the photograph on the right here, how small the people are, right, in comparison to how big the flag is as they're raising it at San Francisco Gay Freedom Day. So, we also have to remember that there in 1978 there wasn't like Joann fabrics where people could go out and buy multicolored fabric. So Gilbert and his friends that were helping him, they literally had to do it by hand. And the original flags were made from cotton, so they bought essentially white cotton. And then at the Gay Community Center in San Francisco, they were dyeing the cotton all of these various colors by hand in these big barrels, and then taking them to a public laundromat and washing them out, right? Because you have to soak the color so the fabric absorbs the dye, and then you have to like wash it out to set the color, and hoping that they wouldn't get in trouble. Because afraid that this dye was going to turn people's clothes who came after them all sorts of different colors, and then sewing, right, these huge flags by hand before they could be displayed. Oh, sorry about that. Here's another photograph of the original flags flying at San Francisco Gay Freedom Day. And one of the things that you'll also notice is that Baker created 2 designs. So in the foreground of this picture, we see the 8 striped cotton flag. And then in the background, we see a different design that is more reminiscent of the American flag. Now, this is not that original flag. It's a replica that Baker created for the television miniseries When We Rise. But we can see that this other flag design has a tie-dye design that's referencing, right, the stars of the American flag, except, right, the stripes in this version are the rainbow stripes. And I think it's quite, ingenious, and also, right, for purposes of time, that they made the stars through tie-dye and not, right, cutting out like individual stars and sewing each one. So we have the 8 stripe flag, and then we also have this version which references the American flag. And here's a photograph of Gilbert Baker creating that replica that appeared in the miniseries When We Rise. And then the flags debuted in 1978 at United Nations Plaza in San Francisco. Now, this is a photograph, not from 1978, but later, taken by Daniel Nicoletta, who's a gay photographer from San Francisco. He actually worked in Harvey Milk's camera shop, Castro Camera. But this photograph gives us an idea of what it looked like, right, when the flags were flying in UN Plaza during that first Gay Freedom Day in 1978. And recently, and when I say recently, like just within the last week or so, a section of the original flag was discovered in San Francisco and given to the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco, right? So we get an idea how huge it was if we look at this photograph, and also interesting to see like how well it's held up over time, even though that hot pink stripe has kind of turned to like a more violet purplish color. And then we can also see, if you look closely, how the color is kind of modeled, and you could really see that this is something that they dyed by hand, that they didn't buy pre-colored fabric. So it was a real labor of love. And Baker's flag design has been displayed in a lot of places. So here's a replica and also one of his sewing machines that's being displayed at MoMA, or the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Version of the flag was on display in the Obama White House during Barack Obama's time as president of the United States. So flags today, typically we see 6 colors. So why? Because when the flag starts to get popular, after it makes that original debut in 1978, and also after Harvey Milk is assassinated in 1978, becomes hugely popular. And Gilbert Baker did not copyright the design of the flag because he wanted people to be able to share it and use it. So flags start to be commercially produced. At the time, it's very difficult to get hot pink colored fabric. So that stripe was taken out. And then they also found that in terms of the way that like the flagpoles were set up in San Francisco, that flags looked better if they had an even number of stripes versus an odd number of stripes. So then the turquoise stripe was taken out as well, right? Because it was also similar to the indigo stripe, which is also blue. And that's how we get, this more typical 6-stripe variation. And then today, as we can see in this photograph, flags are typically made out of nylon, not cotton. Why? It's a more sturdy material. It's easier to produce. But also when the sun shines through nylon, when a flag is flying, you get this really cool like stained glass kind of effect that we can see in the photograph here. One of the other things that's lesser known is that right before his death in 2017, Baker actually created a new version of the flag that he called the diversity flag. And you could see here at the top, he adds a lavender stripe for diversity. This is in response to the Trump administration. And his idea was that that lavender stripe, right, represented LGBTQ people of color, trans and gender nonconforming people, right, LGBTQ immigrants. So adding a stripe to explicitly, right, make that gesture towards, right, people that are not only left out of or often left out of society in general, but are also not typically acknowledged within the LGBTQ community. And then we have, a variety of different versions of the flag that have been created over the years. And Gilbert Baker himself, was open to the flag design evolving as the community evolved, as our understanding of gender and sexuality evolved. So, during the HIV/AIDS epidemic of the 1980s, there was actually a version of the flag that had a black stripe to commemorate people who had died from AIDS. We also see this version, More Color, More Pride, that was created in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that takes the 6-stripe design and adds on a black and a brown stripe for LGBTQ people of color. A more recent design that has been incredibly popular is the Progress flag. It was created by an artist named Daniel Quasar, actually through a Kickstarter campaign. So production of the flag was funded through that campaign. And so Quasar takes the 6-stripe design and then he adds on through this kind of triangular element the brown and black stripe to reference LGBTQ people of color, and then also the transgender flag, which was created by a transgender veteran named Monica Helms, that has alternating light blue, pink, and white stripes to represent trans men or trans masculine folks, trans women, trans feminine folks, right? And then with the white, people who are non-binary or gender non-conforming. So he kind of melds all of that together into an aesthetically pleasing design that has been quite popular. My favorite version, if you care, and I don't even know if this is like officially what it's called, but I would call it the Gilbert Baker Progress flag. It's that same design as Daniel Quasar's, but it reinstates the hot pink and turquoise stripes. Because, right, why not? Because those colors are not an issue today in terms of commercial production. And it's also, right, a way to, I think, pay homage to the flag's history and to Gilbert Baker himself. So I just wanted to share this version as well. And then there's many, many others representing a variety of different identities and experiences within the LGBTQ spectrum. So this brings us to a final point that I wanted to make to you, which so it's June. We're seeing rainbow merchandise everywhere. So I think it's important, right, knowing the history of the flag, that it was a symbol created by the community for the community, and that it's evolved over time, that we think critically about how this symbol is being used. And one of the ways that it's being used relates to a term that is called rainbow capitalism. And so rainbow capitalism is taking the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ activism, LGBTQ symbols like the flag, and using them into corporate marketing campaigns that essentially target the LGBTQ community as consumers in order to obtain a profit, right? And we're seeing, rainbow everything, toothbrushes, Converse sneakers, beverages, just literally everything that corporations are using to appeal to the community during Pride Month. And these appeals or these marketing campaigns are particularly targeted towards members of the community that have the most privilege, right? So typically white, middle to upper class, white cisgender gay men and lesbians. Why? Because that segment of the community holds the most purchasing power. They can, right, more easily purchase these rainbow themed products. So I would encourage you, right, when you see anything that's using this symbol, to think critically and, right, how is it being used? Why is it being created? And who does it benefit, right? Does it ultimately benefit the community? Because again, the flag and the rainbow was a symbol created by the community for the community, or, right, is it not helping the community at all? Is it just about a particular brand wanting to obtain more profits? So, right, just a point of critical thinking here at the end as we wrap up the history of the rainbow flag. And then I do have a little activity for us, but actually at this point, I'll stop and ask if anyone has any questions before we get to the activity.
I was just going to ask, you kind of covered the connection between Gilbert Baker and Harvey Milk, and a little bit about adding that diversity stripe in 2017, I think it was, in the Gilbert Baker flag. So I was just wondering, I know you said it was a response to kind of things going on in the Trump administration. If you could talk a little bit more about, was it specific policies or how was that incorporated?
I think it was a combination of racist policies from the Trump administration, Muslim ban, banning trans people from the military, overturning Obama era executive orders that had provided LGBTQ protections. It's a combination of all of that, right? And of course, Baker's philosophy was the flag needs to evolve as the community evolves. So I think, he saw at that moment, the flag needed to evolve. And I think unfortunately, right, because he dies unexpectedly on March 31st of 2017, and I remember that because it was my birthday. That version that he was working on didn't necessarily, get as much attention as I think it otherwise would have if he hadn't have died, because I think he was, planning to do a variety of different things with that particular design.
Awesome, thank you. I always like learning about just the little history and how our symbols are so important to us in the LGBTQ community. So I think it's really important to understand the social and historical context that was going on at the time those symbols were created.
Oh, and also, one of the other things I wanted to point out is remember, Baker didn't correlate the stripes to particular identities. He correlated them to aspects of experience. And so, we can really see with the diversity flag, with the lavender stripe, how it has a similar message, right, to the more color, more pride flag or the progress flag, but staying true to his original vision and philosophy in terms of, right, incorporating a stripe that is, again, an aspect of experience, right, diversity, recognizing, not all LGBTQ people have the same experiences based on identity, without kind of getting into the complication of correlating specific colors or stripes to identities, because then we could have a flag that is like so complex. And then I think we might get into the problem of if we're using stripes to represent identities, how do we adequately include everyone and also have a workable design that's also aesthetically appealing. So I think it's quite clever what he did with the lavender stripe.
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a fan of that original 8 color flag. I love the pink and the turquoise, and I love that each thing sort of stands for a value or
Yeah.
a representation, an element, like you said, of the community. And because for me personally, it's sort of an opposite. It's in opposition to the binary. It's in opposition to sort of things being black and white, and it's
Yeah.
uh, a point of pride for a lot of folks because it's very, you notice it right away. It stands out. It's very beautiful. It's taken from something in nature. So I've always been a fan of that original 8 color, and I had not seen that Gilbert Baker like progress with the original 8 colors, and I think that that's lovely.
Yes, I love it too. And and I also think it's important to point out that the original design was an inclusive design, but then of course, Galina, as you're pointing out, the importance of historical context that I think within the last 5 years or so, or right, even more, let's say, since the inception of Black Lives Matter and more awareness about the transgender community and violence against trans women of color, that it's important to highlight those aspects in different ways, or to highlight those specific aspects of diversity, I think, by explicitly including the Black and the brown stripe or including the elements of the transgender flag.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right that still having the original 8 colors with the kind of chevron style progress is keeping up with current historical context, recognizing that some folks in our community have different experiences and different struggles. But while we're also still honoring the history of the flag itself and the meaning behind it. So I definitely agree. I think that's my new favorite one.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone else joined us, but do we have any questions from the youth who are here? Or if not, that's totally okay. So I can move on to the activity, and we can talk about this. We can either do it right now, or it's something that you could do on your own time and think about. But I thought it might be fun to using a baker's rainbow flag as a starting point and as an inspiration to create or draw a version of that flag that represents your own unique identity and experiences as an LGBTQ plus person, and to come up with a name for your flag, right? So similar to like No Color, No Pride flag, Progress flag, Baker's diversity flag. So I thought that could be, right, something, a fun way to reflect upon how we as individuals, right, see ourselves fitting into this broader historical symbol. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen.